those guys around are about to break it down like they've won the game a million times.
Well, actually, they didn't really win the game at all.
Survivor no way knows. Survivor no way knows. Stephen Rock without it down. Got the game all figured out. They know it know.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Rob Cesternino here with Stephen Fishbach to break down tonight's episode of Survivor. Stephen, an episode that is a little bit of an unusual episode for Survivor. A lot of real world subjects come up. We'll do our best to talk about it all here tonight. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good. I mean, it was such an incredible, powerful, moving, episode of television. I just want to start off by acknowledging that, my perspective is so limited for this, being a white male. Like, I feel like I need to acknowledge that I'm not going to necessarily, be the best person to speak to some of these issues, but, we'll do our best. And I can only speak to my, reaction, which was, the deep admiration, to see we talked, that's obviously trying to, don't have a particularly lucid.
And to our listeners, we're hoping that you will have some grace with us. Obviously, we can't speak to the lived experiences of the Black or people of color, any of the players in the game that have had different life experiences than Stephen and I have had. All we can do is, talk about what happened on the show and try to, process exactly what went down and where do we go from here. And of course, we're happy to have you here with us tonight after the episode. I do have a great schedule of podcasts for you coming up this week. We are going to have our double exit interview tomorrow morning. We will speak with Roxroy, who, of course, voted out in the first tribal council, but also I'm sure he will have thoughts on that second tribal council. And then also Tori, the person who ends up going home in that second tribal council that I'm sure we will spend so much time talking about. I am very, fortuitous that this week we have Jamal Shipman, season 39, is going to be with me on the podcast. And so Jamal, I'm sure, will be able to bring a lot of insight into all of these topics that's going to be coming up on Thursday. So I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions for Jamal. Really looking forward to talking this all through with him. And then on the feedback show, Sasha Joseph will join me this weekend. And so I will get into your feedback questions with Sasha. I'm also working on another interview with a Survivor alumni. Hopefully that comes through once we have everything confirmed there as well. So lots of great stuff. Make sure you subscribe, robbinswebsite.com/subscribe. Not to mention also Bryson Wendell with our weekly Survivor news segment. I'm sure that Bryson Wendell will have a lot to say. Specifically, Wendell can speak to, his experience in Winners at War, where right around this same time in the game, a lot of people have talked about Wendell as all of a sudden, we can't let Wendell and Jeremy stay together in the game. So I'm sure that he will have a lot to say to weigh in on this. So lots of coverage of this episode coming your way on the RHAP podcast. Stephen, so certainly, you spoke about like the importance of what happened with Drea and Maryanne. It's interesting, like at the end of the night, everybody did what they were supposed to do. Like that it was incredible that Drea and Maryanne like made an important statement, an important point. Drea played her idol correctly. She did like what she ultimately needed to do. And Roxroy being voted out was kind of that. I think she picked up the wrong cue in that I think she interpreted what had happened with Roxroy differently. And of course, we are sort of don't want to say all knowing, because we only get a little bit of the edit, but we know the reasons why Roxroy ends up being targeted, where he ends up proposing an all-male alliance, which Drea presumably would not have been a part of had the all-male alliance worked out. But sort of the hypervigilance that Drea has in that moment is, that she reads it differently and says, okay, well, that above all else, like I'm not following Chanel and Roxroy out of the game. She plays her idol correctly. And at first I was thinking like, it's a shame that Maryanne had to play her idol, but I think that Maryanne probably in that spot, you go into that. I think you should play your idol. Like go back to look at what happened to Nasir. So I think that, like for both of these women, that and it's great that they also, are able to make this important statement. But for anybody that's concerned about like the game, like took a weird turn here, that I think that, everything like went the way that it ultimately, should have gone had everybody been playing correctly.
That's really interesting. That's a great point, that Drea was the target who would have presumably been voted out had she not played her idol, which she did. Maryanne, knowing that she was potentially the decoy boot, would have been correct to play her idol, which she also did on the revote. So there would have been no votes, and the revote Tori probably would have gone home.
And like in another timeline also, like I think that Maryanne was also probably the most likely person for Drea to steal her idol. So also Maryanne's idol was not going to be hers for, now maybe if Drea ends up getting voted out of the game in that spot, that Maryanne can ultimately keep her idol, but that it was very possible that, had Drea stayed, she could have potentially stolen Maryanne's idol. So just from a game perspective, that I don't think anybody should be, worked up about, anything that went awry because of this conversation. It was so interesting, though, to see this play out. And, we have another one of these moments on Survivor where the real world really overtakes what's happening in the game. And it was, very interesting to see how the show handled it. I thought both Drea and Maryanne, as you mentioned earlier, were both, incredibly, poignant with what they were saying. And really, Maryanne, especially, I think when she talked about how the 1 out of 18 chance for these players is not always an equal 1 out of 18 chance.
Yeah. And I mean, wow. How old is she? I mean, that was an unbelievable speech that she gave, where she spoke so cogently and beautifully about, you're not just playing for the other players. You're also very aware of what people at home are going to think. And to have to, do something so big as giving up your idol. Now, to your point, it did make sense in like the game world, but that wasn't her point. It was like, I don't want people to think that I am just getting through this vote because we're talking about race. So I am going to make a very big sacrifice, which is like the most powerful tool you can have in this game, the immunity idol. And I'm going to give that up to show that this is, I'm talking about these issues and I'm bringing up these issues because I believe in these issues and not as some game maneuver. And I mean, what a powerful, thing to have this awareness. I mean, we've all seen, certainly last season, we saw a lot of chatter on Twitter that, whenever anyone brought up a racial issue, how, and to have to be aware of that is obviously tragic, but to be so aware of it and to respond to it like so beautifully and so powerfully in a way that does transcend the game. I mean, it's unbelievable for someone of any age, let alone someone so young. And I mean, we did talk a little bit about this last season when representation was, such a huge theme of the season. That, when you're on Survivor, when you're at Tribal Council, you're so aware of every word. You're thinking of what the different contestants are hearing. You're thinking of what the jury's hearing. You're thinking of what Jeff is hearing. You're thinking, of what the audience at home is hearing. But to have to think about that, not just because of you as an individual and your game, but as a broader representative of a group, like that is so much burden. And again, like I really can't, imagine how difficult it is. And I'm so like moved and not speechless, just like bad speaking, ineloquently speaking myself about how, how incredible, I don't know how incredible it was.
Yeah, I think it's it's really important to highlight for Drea and Maryanne, it's really like a damned if you do say something, damned if you don't. And so there are going to be people who are going to be up in arms about that this comes up on the show. And we certainly like always like see the comments and certainly hear it from a very loud group of people. But I think that when it is a part of the show, like it certainly was a part of this story that we tuned into to watch to see how these 26 days play out. That I do think it is possible to talk about this without vilifying any of the players who were involved here. We got to see all the pieces. We know the reason why Roxroy was, voted out of the game was because that we saw that that Omer and Romeo and Hai, like, they were not down with going with an all male alliance. So, we can see that. But from Drea's perspective, she doesn't know that. All she sees is that, Chanel and Roxroy are sitting there over on the other on the jury bench. The same with Jonathan, that we can see Jonathan's motivations in the game. Jonathan is he is not targeting Drea based on like anything that we see from or hear from him. Has nothing to do with her race, but it doesn't mean that for Drea it doesn't feel that way. He was targeting her. He was coming for her in that game, and for whatever reason, Maryanne also was the person who was on the most on the outs out of the Taku 4. Again, I don't think that anybody is like in the Taku group is intentionally feeling some type of way about Maryanne. But for whatever reason, like those are the facts of the matter. And, Drea and Maryanne both got to speak to, how they are feeling. And, we talk about it all the time in the game that the perception is the reality.
Right. And I mean, Drea's point, she says, I don't think you guys are racist, but I think there's, a subconscious bias. And that leads to the same thing happening repeatedly. And you see the same, result happen over and over again. How do you not start to question the cause?
And in recent history, we have seen what Drea is talking about, how that there are points in the game where it's been well documented about people of color, specifically women of color, are voted out early in the game. But if you go back to season 39, and I know that's not a popular subject for people to go back and reminisce about, but Jamal got voted out of the game, and then what happened immediately after Jamal got voted out? We saw that this situation happened in season 39 when we had the split tribes of that. It was Aaron and Missy. And it was, in both of those instances, it was like, well, they had just won immunity. It wasn't, it has nothing. It was a coincidence that both of them went out at this opportunity in the game. And, it may well have been, but it doesn't mean that it didn't feel like more than a coincidence to the people that it's happening to. And so, like, this is, the story of all of these players who are in this game, and they have every right to talk about it here and it be part of the story.
Yeah. And I mean, the Survivor being a microcosm for society. You know, that's always been the premise of the show. And I'm to be aware of those issues and try to do something to prevent it. I mean, you know, Dre says out of the gate, like I'm taking, you know, the tools I have in this game to, you know, stop something from happening.
Yeah. And, you know, for Drea, who has so many advantages, yeah, like this was like a, you know, a really great moment for her to be able to say, like, that, and if she was not already thinking, I should be playing an idol tonight, like, if you have 4 advantages and you're in that spot, especially with people you don't necessarily trust implicitly, like that's also the correct strategic move. In addition to, you know, amazing message that she had, I do think, like, I agree with what she did strategically.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and she was right. She was right. That was, you know, can't be ignored.
Now, Stephen, do you feel like that the show, and I do feel like that the show had only the best intentions here tonight, where Jeff, you know, they're having this very real conversation. You know, Maryanne had just finished saying her piece, and Jeff said, well, you know, we don't have to go through the whole pomp and circumstance of the game, of going into the little booth and then writing down somebody's name on the piece of paper. You could just tell me, we could just talk it through. I have to say that I don't love that part of it, and I can understand why it happened, but I feel like that it really was that for Jonathan, for Lindsay in particular, like, I feel like that they got off a little bit easy of that they didn't have to write a name down to vote somebody out of the game. And I understand that it is hard to switch the gears of, we're talking about real life, we're talking about something important, to now we're going back to talking about this little game. But that's ultimately, you know, the reason for the season of why we're here, you know?
Yeah. And the game is the context that these issues are being raised. I mean, Drea's whole point is, like, it's the structure of the game. It's important, you know, for, you know, representation to progress into the game, like past this one inflection point. And so then to sort of kind of like throw up your hand, I don't know. I'm really conflicted because, so the only previous time we've really seen this, and correct me if I'm missing something, is Survivor Game Changers,
right,
when Varner outed Zeke. If he did something that was so transgressive, it felt like this, you know, making this a game thing. Like, and Varner got up, right? He was agreed basically that he was right. Am I remembering correctly that
you're remembering 100% correctly. But if there was a shot in the dark at that point, with Jeff Varner, I bet he would have. You know, it's almost like, are we doing the game, or are we like, are we doing the shot? So like, but we're gonna, like, we're not really gonna vote, but we are gonna do the shot in the dark. It just seems like a weird way to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, you know, Drea and Maryanne's, you know, decision to sacrifice their idols, which were both game-based moves and symbolic moves, you know, in some ways take this moment out of, like, they kind of broaden it outside of the game, but again, like, they're occurring in the game. And I agree, like, it gives everyone kind of, you know, and I you know, not having been there, probably this conversation went on for, you know, longer than
no doubt.
I'm sure it was extremely intense, you know, as intense as it was to watch it, an edited version months later. I can't imagine how powerful it must have been to be there. And I can see Jeff feeling like it would trivialize this moment to then be like, okay, everybody, let's break out the parchment, you know, and like write a name down and put it in the urn. But at the same time, like, that is the context that these things are happening. And I think that's what's beautiful and powerful about Survivor, is that it's a game that has the space to, you know, address these issues. And I do agree with you. I mean, I thought that it would have been, I mean, it's so hard, like for me, I don't totally feel like I have the, grounds to like, say what should have been. And I'm really curious to hear what your other guests this week and what the conversation, because like, yes, but for me too, I do, and like, Tori plays her shot in the dark, as she should have,
Right.
I mean, and I thought, she's like, okay, I guess it's all, it became this group think of we're voting that person out, when I do think it ultimately should have been a personal choice. I think it should have been like, yeah, I mean, to me, like the idea of it being a personal choice, everyone kind of like making their decision would have been a good way to move forward rather than a kind of like, well, whatever, you're done, kind of motion. I don't know. I mean, what's your perspective?
So I think the interesting part of this, and again, we can really only speak to what we saw from the game perspective of this. So we saw where Jonathan, I thought, handled everything, extremely poorly coming into this episode where, Jonathan, he ends up being the only man in the tribe with the other 4 women that are in the game. And so Jonathan, who says the right things, I feel like in his confessionals of like, I can't just be the like the dominant male figure out there. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but then he does kind of proceed to go and do that where he comes up with the plan of, hey, we're going to blindside Drea tonight, which again, smart, sound strategy, make a move on the person that has all of the advantages. But he goes about it in a weird way where he seemingly goes to Maryanne first, and Maryanne's like, yes, I'm on board, but then tells Maryanne that she's going to be the decoy vote, really for no reason when Tori was there, because he has an incorrect read that, oh, Drea and Tori, they're both women from the same tribe, they must be tight. Where both Maryanne and Lindsay say like, Maryanne just agrees with Jonathan. Lindsay pushes back to Jonathan and says, hey, you have this all wrong. This is like, she doesn't like you're not hearing me. And he just like pushes back hard. Like, you're not hearing me. I said, that they're, and so I thought this was actually Lindsay's best episode of the season by a lot. And so Lindsay, who, and it's unclear how much loyalty she has to Drea. Again, they had Tori sitting right there. For Lindsay, we never really got her first person perspective, like the whole season of, would she rather do the taku for, like how much is she really considering the amulet group? She's like, hey, like this plan needs work. We got to make sure that, if Drea is going to play her advantage, that, we need to also have votes going on Maryanne as well. So that there's a lot of like misleading of Drea. I think at first, like Drea sees that Roxroy is voted out of the game and is like, oh, hey, hold on. Like, what's going on? There's something going on. And Maryanne kind of like talks about at one point, she eventually says like, I will not write down Drea's name tonight. It's like she kind of gives up the game of that, oh, we were blindsiding Drea. And so that there must have been a betrayal of like, did Drea know that this was coming? Was she getting a weird vibe the whole day? And then when she saw Roxroy, was that sort of like the confirmation? I just think that there's a lot of like other layers that like led up to this playing out this way. But then, that it never really gets confirmed that at the tribal council that Maryanne says, I will not write Drea's name down tonight. But we never really get to see Drea ask like, oh, so we're all voting me out tonight.
Yeah, I felt like I did see that some sort of reaction from her. But maybe I didn't have the closest read on that. I have to rewatch that. Because, it's right. She was confirmed in her perception. It was the fact that Tori was not the decoy boot was just beyond
wild
me, because
wild.
I mean, it felt like this was one of those things. I mean, sometimes, we don't have a full perception of all of the different calculations that the survivors are making. You know, everyone's different priorities on the island. You know, these things are talked to death. And but you know, from the story we're seeing, Tori has been the go-to, you know, boot who they've been hoping to get out forever. You know, it's, even if they didn't trust her, they didn't need to trust her because they had 3 votes. They could just tell, you didn't have to even tell Tori, you know, Drea.
Tori has no advantages. Right.
They could tell Tori anything, you know, and it didn't matter. Like they could have told Tori to vote Maryanne. They could have, the 3 of them vote Drea and tell Drea to vote Tori. You know, I mean,
I think the concern was that if we let it get, let it get out that it's going to be Tori, that the decoy is Tori, she could tell Drea to play her. It didn't make a lot of sense.
No, but they didn't even
overall
have to tell Tori that she was the decoy. They could have told Tori that Maryanne was the decoy. You know, like they didn't even let, because they had 3 out of the 5 votes on this tribe. They didn't need to let anybody in on the actual plan.
So going back to Tori, that, you know, we saw Tori said, I'm going to play the shot in the dark. That, do you feel like was there a potential way out for Tori? And again, because they didn't have the vote, you know, there's no way of you know, Tori had limited options of what she could do, but you know, and again, I don't know how in poor taste it would have been for Tori to say like, hey, Drea, do you know all these people were voting you out today? They came to me you know, we can, let's do something. Because it seemed like that Drea was still on board for Tori to be the person who goes home.
But they still would have only had 2 votes out of the 5 votes. So even, I mean, it really ultimately, right, Maryanne, Lindsay, and Jonathan were going to be making the decision of who was eliminated. They were never going to choose Lindsay. So, I mean, the question is, there was presumably only one shot in the dark
extra
scroll.
vote. Yep.
I guess that's true. They could have made it a tie vote. You know, but then Maryanne has her extra vote. Do you think, presumably there's only one shot in the dark, right? So it made the reason that Lindsay, if there was only you know, at the merge, Jeff said, okay, now there's 2 chances.
Right.
To take the shot
but
in the
no,
dark.
so yeah, I saw some people were asking, why didn't Lindsay play her shot in the dark? I think that Lindsay just felt like, oh, I'm gonna be pretty confident here in my 83.33333 chance of that it's gonna come my way.
But if there was another, so the reason to not play the shot in the dark is if there was only one scroll, then either Tori has it or she doesn't. But if there were 2, which I'm assuming there weren't on the smaller split tribes,
I would think it went back to 1 in 6. So she could have
2,
also
100%, regard 83%. Why not make it, you know, whatever slightly higher percentage? If there were 2, Lindsay 100% should have done that.
You think so? I mean, would the odds have been that different? I mean,
why not?
Well, her odds were either going to be, you know, once we see Tori play one of the shots in the dark, her odds are either at that point, I guess she doesn't get to go and oh, I'm gonna get one if she's safe, right?
Well, hypothetical. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so her odds are either at that point either 2 in 11 or, you know, 1 in 11.
If there are 2, which I'm assuming there aren't, there's no downside and only upside, right? Even if it's 1 in 11.
Well, the downside is she doesn't have her shot in the dark anymore.
Right.
You only get 1.
That's true. Yeah.
So she's there's 83% chance I'm gonna be fine right now. Yeah.
I guess that's right. But
I'll save it for a night when I really need it.
Yeah.
And God did not want, Tori felt like that. Hey, I know when my back is against the wall, God's gonna bail me out. God did not come through tonight.
He made his choice.
The
Jewish God won against the Christian God there.
It didn't work out for Tori. So I am very interested to see the exit interviews tomorrow.
Yeah.
So now moving past this, I mean, how do you think that this changes the game moving forward?
I mean, I don't see how it doesn't shake things up. You know, I do think Jonathan's stock has to go down here, right? Like
I think this is it for Jonathan.
Yeah.
I think that, and I know Jonathan has made many fans over the weeks, but I just feel like that this was a bad night for him on a lot of fronts. I think that him winning an immunity challenge, I think also like, okay, all right, he's on the radar now. The way that he sort of like mishandled the dealings with, it seems like that when it was just him and the women. And again, I think he was really emboldened by winning the immunity challenge where he had the necklace. It's like, all right, now like I gotta like really, and again, he gave a confession where he's like, I'm not gonna do that, but then he proceeded to go and do the exact thing he said he wasn't gonna do.
I mean, he's right though. Like, this is Tyson Apostle's theory that when you have the immunity necklace is when you should take the biggest moves. Now that doesn't mean you should handle them like he handled them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that he was pretty clearly condescending to Maryanne. You never tell someone that they're going to be the decoy boot. I mean, you never, especially just like act like, oh yeah, it's totally fine for you to be the decoy boot. And hey, if things go wrong, I guess it
especially
could be
you're going to be the decoy boot. We're going after a woman who has, I believe 4 advantages. Yeah.
Right.
But like, as long as she doesn't play any of them, you'll be fine.
I mean, it was just like the casual way that he said that. I mean, there's so much, it's such a fraught thing to say to someone, oh, you're like, why not Lindsay? Like, then when he was, obviously had that conversation with Lindsay and like refused to listen to her until she was like, by the way, if Drea plays her idol, then Maryanne could be going home. It's like,
he's like, hold on, let's think about this for a second. Let's have a think on this.
Steven,
I thought it was wild that he seemingly went to Lindsay last, where I thought that Lindsay was probably like of the people in the group that like his closest strategic confidant.
I mean, we don't know ultimately, right? Like what the order was or what caused that order of conversations. Maybe Lindsay was having an interview and Maryanne was available.
I guess so, but I mean, wouldn't you want to talk that through with your closest person where, I feel like that, and the way I look at it, I feel like if I have important decisions to make, I want to build like consensus, like start with the most important stakeholders, so you get their thoughts. And then and you don't go too far down the road without talking to the people that are like the really, important people in making this decision. You don't want to like go like too far away without them.
Well, that was 100% the thing he was doing wrong, which was like not making it a consensus decision and just legislating how things were going to be. I mean, that conversation with Maryanne veered off so quickly. First he's like, I think we should do this big move. Maryanne's like, yes, big move. I'm all in. And then he's like, oh, and it's going to be you if things don't work out. She's like, totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, we should talk a little bit about the other group of 5.
Yeah, I just want to moving on from this. It will be very interesting to see if Drea and Maryanne have a bond over this. Right. Do people look at them now and we saw that on the Consumer Cellular commercial tonight that we got to see Michaela and Suri. Another story of 2 Black women who made the merge. And, I think that people, that there was definitely some concern about like, okay, they're working together. Will they be unfairly targeted potentially after this of like, oh, they must be working together now, even if they're not? That's just another layer of the things that, Drea and Maryanne were talking about, of the types of concerns that they are dealing with that maybe white players don't have to be thinking about in the game. So I did think though that they did have going to Shipwheel Island earlier in the season. They did have also the bond over the idol. Like I had been a little surprised that they hadn't been like having a better relationship based on those past experiences in the game. It'll be interesting to see, where their relationship goes from here.
Well, if anything, it seemed like Drea couldn't stand Maryanne, right? I mean, there was that tribal council.
Yes. They had the dust up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. And then where does Jonathan go from here? Because Jonathan looked also very surprised about Roxroy being voted out of the game. Like Jonathan seemed on board with Roxroy's idea of the all-male alliance, which we'll talk about. So this is going to, I think, really have a lot of ramifications coming out of this tribal council for where we go when the two tribes, the two tribes now of 4, get back together. And I think there's going to be like a lot of storytelling about like, each side saying what happened at their respective tribal council.
Well, and the big alliance has, all the trust is fractured, right? I mean, you've seen now we have Jonathan and Lindsay have tried to vote out Drea. She knows about it. Obviously, a bunch of people from the big alliance turned on Roxroy. Mike and Hai and Omer were in that alliance. Romeo not in that alliance, but they turned on Roxroy. So the trust within, Romeo and Romeo and Hai have now voted together. The trust within that big alliance is fractured, and it does seem like other smaller groups might come together. So it's interesting. And those big groups never really do last more than a vote or two.
Yeah. So going back to the first group that went to tribal council. So we saw Roxroy at the beginning of the episode said, hey, let's do the guys alliance. And, the survivor god said, okay, Roxroy, you want to work with the guys? Okay.
It was amazing.
Here you go.
For you. And interesting, I mean, Roxroy was also protecting Romeo, not for nothing, who was the target. And Roxroy said, hey, let's not vote out Romeo. Romeo and Roxroy, were on a tribe together. Like, I don't think that can be ignored. I'm sure Roxroy sincerely meant, all guys, let's be guys strong, fist bump. But he also was inadvertently or advertently protecting someone from his original tribe. And I don't think except for tonight when that Taku 4 group was mentioned, those early tribe bonds have not, I guess we have Hai and Mike and that sort of been thing. But I'm surprised that has not been a more prominent feature of the strategic conversations of the season.
So when we get to that group of 5, it seems like, okay, Romeo is on the outs. And it was very interesting that Romeo tried to have a hinky vote at the at least tried to deny that he was the vote for Hai. Now, interestingly, we saw Hai react not in the greatest way to having his name written down at tribal council. And, it goes back to something interesting that Chanel had told me in her exit interview, that she said that, Hai really he doesn't just want to win. Hai wants to play the perfect survivor game. And so having now a vote cast against him, I think was like another, another bloom off the rose.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It is. But you never want to do that, especially after a vote where your group was wildly successful. You never want to go back to camp and, point fingers. If anything, Romeo, who handled it very well, should be the one who's pissed, because he was, he got 3 votes. He would have been voted out if Chanel had some sort of safety.
So we get this group. Okay, so Roxroy, that he feels like, okay, this is the 5. Okay, it's Roxroy, Mike, Jonathan, Hai, and Omer. That's the 5. Except Omer doesn't really, he's not down with it. He doesn't want to do this. It doesn't sound like a great idea for him. And also, Hai has no interest in being in the guys' alliance.
Well, and Omer's rationale is like a great one. Both of the rationales are great ones, but Omer's of, you're asking me to go to 5 with you, but then what happens at 5? Like, I'm going to win immunity. Like, where am I at 5? And I think that's often, a fatal flaw when you're proposing an alliance. Like, everyone has to see a path to win for themselves. And if you are trying to create a group where certainly one person does not see that path, then that person will never be a great ally, because everyone needs to see how and especially someone who's as obviously strategic as Omer, needs to see a clear path to their victory.
Yeah, a 5 is like tricky to do, especially when it's not like a starting tribe. It's got to be like 2 pairs, and then like both pairs see like the 5th person as like a third wheel, and the person who's like that 5th person thinks that they're in a 3 with like 2 different sets, and might be, and then pick their favorite twosome to go with. So that was not the way that this was constructed. Roxroy, he can build a hell of a shelter, but maybe not an alliance. That is not his engineering strength.
Yeah. And he was very confident in that alliance, though, to his credit. And
Well,
you know, go ahead.
It's the Survivor kiss of death, especially when they go to tribal council. When Jeff's like, "So, what was going on back at camp?" And Rock's like, "It's really pretty quiet.
Yeah, we were no strategy.
And
the Garrett from
it's very
Cagayan.
calm. Yeah,
No strategy happening here.
Yeah, very calm.
That's when you knew. That's when it was clear who was going home from that tribe.
Yeah. So let's just talk about this. Okay. So Ulmer goes to Hai and gives Hai the option, really, doesn't necessarily, tell Hai, this is what we're doing, but lays out the case. I thought does a really great job with that and makes the case why they need to keep Romeo. I mean, I thought this is a really great move for Ulmer to keep Romeo, who's a piece for him. Get rid of Roxroy, who he does not really have a great relationship with, and also like kind of inadvertently kind of puts a wedge in between Hai and Mike.
Yeah. No, it was a great move. It really was a great move. And Ulmer's thinking of, I want to keep the people I can mold, not the people who I can't mold, is great. I mean, I for most of the season thought that Roxroy was exactly who you want in the game of Survivor, someone who is not going to pull off big moves, someone who is, extremely forthright about their plan and does not deviate from their plan, is not capable of, last minute switches and changes to the votes that throw so much chaos and throw so much stress into the game of Survivor. But, if that person is so fixed in a direction that is inimical to you, Ulmer, the strategist, it does make sense. You want to get rid of the person if they're going off like so aggressively and so straightforwardly into a direction that isn't good for you. And the idea of wanting to keep someone, I mean, certainly like for Ulmer, wanting to keep someone who is a number for him, who is open to make moves, who he does seem to have a good friendly relationship with, makes a lot of sense as opposed to someone like Roxroy, where that's not the case.
Stephen, so let's talk a little bit about Mike moving forward, because that, from what I understand, you feel pretty good about Mike from here on out.
I feel like I'm being set up here, Rob.
No, that I just but you feel like that Mike is in a good spot moving forward.
I think Mike's in a good spot. I think people like him. I think he has a pretty good social game. Like we've certainly said that a bunch of times. I think that nobody's targeting Mike, but he's still like a strong, people respect Mike. I think Mike's in a good spot. Yeah.
I think that Mike, I think is in trouble for a couple of different reasons. I think that Mike is very linked to Jonathan, who I feel like that, right. And this isn't the Survivor stock watch, but I thought that Jonathan stock might have hit like, the Netflix nosedive this week where he was soaring and then I think really came back down to earth. I think that now there is a little bit of a wedge between Mike and Hai. I think that Hai could be potentially, going in some different directions. And the other big thing I think working against Mike right now, Drea still has the knowledge is power. And guess what? Nobody else has any advantages. So Mike with an idol, the woman with the knowledge is power advantage, like there's only one place left to go with that knowledge is power.
But so I hear you. Maybe Mike will lose his idol, but I think in all of Mike's relationship, he's the smaller target, right? So Hai is a bigger target than Mike. Jonathan is a bigger target than Mike. Nobody's gunning for Mike out of those groups. And as a result, to be the smaller target in all of your different groups, that's kind of a good position to be in because he's in a lot of different alliances, but nobody's targeting him. And, if he loses Hai, that's good. If Hai stays, that's good for him because he's got a confidant and someone to vote with. If Hai goes, that's good for him because then he's less of a threat because he has fewer connections. And I think, the splintering of this big group, actually bad for someone like Hai, right? Who was operating very well within that big group. But now, who wants to, we know that Romeo doesn't want Hai around. I think Hai was in some ways protected by being a part of that group. Mike maybe feels like he was put in a bad spot by Hai. So in some ways, I feel like this is a worse situation for Hai to have gone from kind of the very vocal, organizer to now having that big group that he was maybe the figurehead for fracture.
I think it's also going to be very interesting. We're down to 8. There's a Taku 4. Does the Taku 4 vote together again this season?
It would definitely be the smart thing to do. I mean, would it be the smart thing to do? It's a smart thing to do for maybe for all of them. I mean, certainly the smart thing to do for Jonathan, right?
Jonathan doesn't have that many other options. Yeah.
Well, right. I think maybe also because Jonathan, maybe people are seeing him in a different, slightly worse light. It could also be a not terrible thing for, Lindsay, Maryanne, and Omar to move forward with him, where he's someone who will be a target. Maybe even, we don't really know, someone who you would want to sit next to, as incredible as he is physically. If people are rubbed the wrong way by him, and if people don't think he is a strategic force, they might not give him the $1 million. I don't know. I mean, if you had a final 3 of, or final 4, let's say, of those 4, every one of them would have an interesting
remind me which 4, the Taku 4?
The Taku 4. Every one of them could say could have some sense of I'm differentiated from these others, Every one of them could say I have a case to make that's different from these other 3.
Yeah. I think really what it's going to come down to is what does Omar want to do? Omar is really, has a lot of options. There is the Taku 4 route that he can go. He sort of cultivated this relationship with Hai. Still has Romeo potentially as somebody to work with. Could Maryanne break off and potentially want to go in a different direction? So I think that he is once again, I think going to be the key person to watch coming into this next vote.
And we've seen conversations with Romeo and Maryanne. I mean, there could be, you've certainly said that sort of group that Romeo was recruiting could be a force, and it certainly didn't look like it last week. Yeah. But with Tori gone, she was one of those numbers,
right?
But the big group is split up, so it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
But what I've been saying about Tori all week was I felt like if Tori could make it through the split vote, I thought to pencil Tori in for the final 4, because if once we get through this big spot, I mean, this tough 5-5 split, if she makes it through that, she's in the final. She didn't make it through that, but now I think Romeo's inherited that. I think I would be surprised if Romeo is the next person voted out.
Yeah, my guess is the big targets next week will be Hai, right? I mean, for the reasons I just said, but
yes,
and probably Jonathan, right?
Hai and Jonathan, yeah. That's what I am, keeping my eye on, and maybe they're looking at Jonathan and Jonathan wins immunity potentially, but that's where I see things going at the final 8. Stephen, we have questions from the listeners of the podcast. You want me to start to bring them in? Okay. Yeah. All right. So here we go. Let's start with Benji Holder. Does it seem unfair that Tori was able to play her shot in the dark with the knowledge that she was for sure getting the votes? No one else has played theirs and had that advantage.
I don't think that's unfair necessarily. I think it would have been unfair for her not to have the opportunity to play the shot in the dark. Because of a group decision.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a certain, yeah.
That's why I felt like that, just calling off, again, it was one of those things, the tribal council, where it's everybody, I guess, agreed to it in the moment.
But Jeff proposed it. When Jeff proposes something, you're not going to be no, Jeff, I want to go write down the name on parchment. I
could see where it could be in poor taste to say, why don't we vote? Let's just see what happens. For the sake of fairness, Tori should have definitely been allowed to play her shot in the dark in that spot.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Stephen, here's a question from Drea's number one fan.
Drea's number one fan wants to know, what was better, Jonathan's hyped up face when asked to join a guy's alliance, or Jonathan's dumbfounded expression when Lindsay pointed out the faults in his voting plan? My answer is B. It was a very funny moment. I mean, it was really
hold on, let's just think this through. Your Death Star has a fatal flaw.
Yeah. Do you want to do exactly?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Caitlin wants to know, do you think that Drea and Maryanne's idols will be rehidden? If so, would they be Beware or regular idols?
That's an interesting question. What happened last season with the idols?
So that they did not, or if they did rehide the idols, they were not ever found. So we saw Nasir and then Shan voted out with idols. There was a point where Danny went looking for the idol. I think they also highlighted on the screen. But I think they also highlighted on the screen that he was close. And tell me if I'm misremembering that, chat. But Ricard was pretty convinced that he had found another one. So I think they might be hidden. That being said, that Drea has also found the Beware advantage idol. So is that 2 idols that Drea has? So Drea still has 1 idol, right?
No, she has no. Which isn't a.
What did she find last week, Stephen?
Knowledge
power. Knowledge is power. Okay, and then knowledge is power could be she could steal an idol from Mike.
But the idol, typically when idols are played, they're rehidden. I mean, I don't know if it's consistent season to season. And when someone's voted out, they're not rehidden. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's probably. I'm sure there's places where that's not the case, but I think when an idol is played, it often does re-enter the game.
Yeah, I think that there probably will be something else rehidden. If I had to guess, don't forget there's also the amulets. Also, all 3 of the amulet people make it to the final 8, and that extra vote could loom large.
Yeah, seriously.
All right. Shay says Jonathan has been used as a shield to some degree by at least 5 players. So is it possible he could shift from a shield to a GOAT/0 vote finalist from playing a bad social and strategic game? Is that a possibility?
I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to. I don't think it's impossible. I think that can certainly happen very quickly. And it's something that, I mean, if you can be as an amazing a physical competitor as you want, but if people don't think you're playing a good game, they may not give you the win. Certainly seen a lot of people who were challenge beasts not win the final showdown.
Right, especially if it starts to become laughable of his strategic acumen. I'm trying to think of maybe who is the case of, Colby ends up losing to Tina, even though he is more of the strategic player. Brad loses to Sarah, and he has won 4 or 5 immunities in that.
Ozzy lost to Yule.
That's right. Okay,
Chrissy?
Stephen, what? Chrissy? Yes, Chrissy won a number of challenges,
4?
but it was
4, right?
But I don't think it was because that people thought Ben was the brains of the operation. I don't think it was necessarily that case. Okay. All right, Stephen, here's a question for you from Shot in the Dark Bag.
Shot in the Dark Bag wants to know, is anyone ever going to get saved by the shot in the dark?
All right,
I felt it coming this week. I really was like, oh man, Tori's going to get it.
Tori's going to get it. So this was the 5th time in Survivor history that the Shot in the Dark was played. We are 0 for 5, but as we all know,
it's a 1 in 6 chance.
It's a 1 in 6.
100% chance that the next time it's played, it will hit.
Mm-hmm.
That's how statistics work, right?
I mean, I think that
David that check my math.
That we would be due if it doesn't happen the next time.
Yeah, I mean we're due next time.
Yes, that should be it's the train is coming next time the Shot in the Dark gets played. Okay, should Lindsay have played her Shot in the Dark? No, I don't think so.
Well, I don't know. I think that if the votes are coming your way and you're not even actually sacrificing a vote, or that if you know that you're going to be eliminated if someone else's hits, I think I would do it because you don't how often do you actually know that you have a chance of going home? I mean, that said, I don't even think there probably was another. I think it was probably just one Shot in the Dark in the bag. So either Tori has it or she doesn't have it. So in that case, there's no real reason to do it for Lindsay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that if there's only 1 out of 6, if Tori is safe, there's no second safe for you.
Yeah, and if she's not safe, then you don't need it. So
you
there's no
don't
reason
need
to play.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question. High's Dog Socks. Should players be able to play idols before the vote? It feels icky because it can ultimately change who goes home if you can't vote for them in the first place. So, you know, this has only happened. I think the only other time that this came up was in HHH, previously mentioned HHH, where Devin Pinto was like, if you're going to play your idol, why don't you just give it to Jeff now? And he's like, fine, I will. And so Ben played an idol before the vote. You know, we were dealing with a lot of real world issues here tonight. So when, you know, Drea and Maryanne, you know, give their idol, you know, I think that it takes away the possibility that they could have been like trying to you know, that they could have went through all that and then said, you know what, I think we're not gonna play the idols tonight. Like, oh wait, you know, so like I don't know if that was like you know, on, you know, production's mind in terms of like this would be a disaster if that was the case ultimately, but you know, like you know, I think it could have really, you know, if they said, okay, well, if Jeff said, hey, you have to wait until after we're gonna vote, then you can that Drea and Maryanne, hold on a second, you play your idols like after the votes are read, and then like it really would have like, you know, unmasked like anybody that would have like tried to go and write their names down.
Well, I mean, the question is like, should players generally be allowed to play their idols first? I think the answer is yes. You should be allowed to play it whenever at tribal council. But it actually disincentivizes. I mean, you shouldn't do it.
You shouldn't do
in
it.
a normal,
yeah,
because you're first of all, you are you're losing information, like you're just saying,
right.
Like, you know, you otherwise you get to see who actually was voting against you. If you play it first, I wasn't going to vote for you. No, of course not. You're my close ally. I would have never voted for you. Secondly, and maybe most importantly, if you play your idol during the vote, you have a lot more control over who actually gets eliminated. Your vote is going to matter a lot more. If you play it, I'm sorry, if you play it after the vote. If you play it before the vote, then the other people can say, okay, well, let's vote for that person. You know, your ally, your number two. If you play, you know, so
the one time that when Ben did it, I think there actually was some strategic benefit, because I think that, and I don't remember if Ben had said this or if we sort of like hypothesized this, where that everybody else was aligned. So it's like, all right, well, like now you'll have to reveal who you're you're gonna have to, you know, eat one of your own tonight. You can't just, you know, put your votes on me and let me be the one vote. I want you to like vote for one of your own here.
And that was sort of like the Three Amigos move. Like they did. I mean, obviously they didn't actually play it in that situation, but that was kind of the, you know, the posture was like, we're all immune, so you guys are going to have to figure it out amongst yourselves.
Right. Yeah, and I think that from production standpoint, you know, you've had this really important conversation that's being, you know, happening at tribal council, and then, you know, you like are, you know, like, you know, Mary and Dre are pouring their hearts out, and then you have sort of like a muddy outcome where now, you know, Jonathan is still trying to vote out Drea, like at the end of all of that. That I think from a TV perspective, I think that they're feeling like, okay, like with this is the cleanest way to close out this conversation.
That could be.
Okay. Here is Justin Kirkpatrick.
Justin wants to know, what do you think of the split tribal format? Does that take away from the merge to separate them again? What do you think, Rob?
No, I don't. I think if anything, like I've been saying this all week, even that I feel like that we missed the final 9 vote by doing it this way. If anything, I feel like I wish we would have done it at the final 11, where we had sort of like the not super exciting vote last week, and then have a tribe of 6 and a tribe of 5 if they do want to do this. But I don't know. It's I understand the idea here in the 26-day season of like, hey, we have one day we can get rid of 2 people in sort of like an interesting way. But I don't think they need to do this every season.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we talked about last week how we said last week, it never happens that someone in the majority alliance gets eliminated by these things. Well, it happened tonight. Roxroy was in the majority alliance, and he got taken out instead of Romeo. So, I mean, you know, in terms of it never having an impact on the actual tribal structure, you know, that was proven untrue tonight.
Yeah. And the same as last season, you know, we had somebody like a bigger, you know, a more like a prominent person in the alliance got taken out in Nasir, and then a person who was on the bottom at that particular point in time in Evie like went home. So
Right.
similarly this season, we lose Tori and Roxroy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Patrick Wells says, wouldn't it be cool if Maryanne and Drea played their extra votes instead of using their idols? Their 4 votes would decide to vote in the same way. Look, Patrick, we don't need to get cute. Like I think they're making it. I think they're making a point here and not doing like a parlor trick. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not trying to like oh, this will be cool if we could get on the Survivor wiki tonight. Trying to, they're making a statement.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What does Charles?
Charles wants to know: would Tori have been better off on the other team where there weren't 2 idols, or is she still voted out? Well, what if Tori and Romeo were switched here? Is Tori as the one woman now in the all men's alliance group? Does she make it through?
I am not sure, because I feel like that Romeo had been sort of like a useful ally to Omer, and I'm not sure that Tori is necessarily a useful ally to. I don't recall if we ever saw a scene of Omer and Tori talking, so I think Tori probably is still out there.
Yeah. It's still voted out. Yeah. My guess.
Yeah, I think it ends up voted out. I think Roxroy lives to see another day in the game.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen. I know there's a lot going on tonight. Anything else you want to mention from this episode?
No, I mean I think we covered it. And I'm really excited to hear, what your guests this week have to say. Obviously, we'll be able to have a lot more insight and perspective into these specific issues than I do. And I'm really excited to hear.
Well, Stephen, thank you very much. That it's not easy for us to do the show on a night like this, and I'm sure that most people can understand where that all we can do is try to make sense of what we're able to glean from the show, and then we'll continue to listen and hear what other people, whether it's from the Survivor alumni or people that are in the Survivor community, are telling us about their experiences. And we're all Survivor fans and love this same crazy show. All right, Stephen, let me tell you about what's coming up here over these next couple of days here on RHAP. I told you double exit interviews coming up tomorrow. That is going to be with Roxroy and then Tori on our exit interview podcast. I'll be catching up with Jamal Shipman on Thursday, so be on the lookout for that one. Should be a great conversation with Jamal on the Survivor Feedback Show. Sasha Joseph, one half of the brand new podcast called Mess Magnets with Kirsten McInnes. Sasha will join me on the Survivor Feedback Show. And then on the Survivor Academy this week, Lindsay Wilson will join me to talk about what future players can learn from this week's Survivor episode for the patrons of Robin's Podcast at robinswebsite.com/patron. Plus, I had a podcast this weekend with Nasir from season 41, working on another podcast, bonus podcast for you this weekend as well. Over on our Survivor feed, of course, I told you about Bryce and Wendell, of course, every week with the Survivor News edition of the Purple Pants podcast. We've got a ton of great guests this week as well. The B&B welcomes back Justin McElroy. George from Australian Survivor Season 6 is going to be joining Shannon Gus this week, not to mention Why Blank Lost and Puya Zambakili on the Survivor Stock Watch. Make sure you subscribe to our Survivor podcast feed as well to hear all of that. All right?
Rob, Allison Sarah just tweeted, after Drea and Maryanne played their idols, Lindsay and Tori could only vote for each other. Typically, Jeff would tell them they will not vote. I believe you can't play your shot in the dark if you don't have a vote.
Mhm.
Should have already been allowed to play it. That's an
I
interesting
think
twist.
I think that they are making up the rules as they go along at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
I think that Jeff would have been very happy if Tori just got up and brought her torch over. But I think that they said, "All right, fine, go get a shot in the dark." Yeah, nobody's going to hit it anyway. Okay. All right. Stephen, next week, of course, you and I, I'm sorry, that I will, I'm talking about the royal you, the listener, and I will be together in New York City for a live show for the first time in over 2 years. We'll be live in New York City with a bunch of Survivor alumni. But for the people that tune in every single week, they will not be without Stephen Fishbach. Stephen, I know you have a very special show planned next Wednesday night.
Yeah. I thought to myself, who, I gotta like steer this ship by myself. And I wanted like to get a real classic
road trip.
know-it-all.
Yes.
What?
The road trip that is a podcast.
Yeah. I was thinking like the ship of state, of RHAP state. And I want to get a guest who embodies the theme of the show, someone who knows the game so well, makes it just before the end, and is not able to, pull it off. And so I will be podcasting next week for the Survivor Know-It-Alls with Aaron Lobdell from Survivor Token Sheens.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's going to be a great podcast. Be sure to check out.
How do you know? It could be terrible.
That I used to have Aaron on the podcast all the time.
Aaron's great. I mean, I'm just saying, maybe I can screw something up. I might just like not,
No, you're going to be issues. It's gonna be great. Steven and Aaron really back excited. Together for Survivor 42. The big recap of the final 8 next week, live at 9:15 p.m. Eastern time. And of course, the show that we film in New York City, you will be able to hear that. That is going to be, we'll post that on Thursday instead of me interviewing a survivor on a Thursday and sort of not being, having a voice or anything like that. We will bring you that show on Thursday. So you'll have a know-it-alls on Wednesday night, and then our live show will come to you on Thursday, plus our exit interview as well next week. All right?
I'm very excited.
Plus, speaking of Survivor Token Sheens, guess who is back this week?
Who? JT?
Tyson Apostle.
Oh, he's great too.
Tyson rejoined the News AF crew. Check that out. Talking about the biggest stories of the week. Steven, you wouldn't believe what people think they're going to do with the Snickers bar. Okay. Check that out over on the latest News AF with Rob, Danny, and Tyson back together once again.
Wow.
And I told you Sasha's coming up on the feedback show this week. You can catch her every week with Kirsten McInnes on our brand new Mess Magnets podcast, talking about all of the mess going on in the celebrity world this week. The divorce that everybody's talking about. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Steven, you know what's going on with that stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. If you're there for the mess, check out Sasha and Kirsten in the Mess Magnets podcast feed at robiswebsite.com/mess feed. Plus, when you become a patron of Rob is a podcast, of course, that people wonder, well, how did everybody get tickets for the live show? That was part of being a patron, that they bought up all the tickets in record time for this live event coming up in New York. Plus, Big Brother Canada is coming to a close. If you want to watch the Big Brother Canada finale live next week, of course, we make it very easy for you to do. You get Survivor Academy, Patron 5 for 5. This week, I had our patron cast as well, taking calls with the patrons of Rob's podcast, and get access to our patron community on Facebook and Discord. That's all at robiswebsite.com/patron when you support everything we're doing here on RHAP. Not to mention, of course, the podcasts you get for free when you go to robiswebsite.com/subscribe. You can get all of our podcast feeds all in one place at robiswebsite.com/subscribe. All right, Steven, anything interesting coming up for you this week?
No.
Do you have a fishy for this group?
Who do you think the fishy should go to? I guess it's got to give it to Drea and Maryanne. I mean, both for, you know,
on another night, I would say give it to Omer, but
yeah, no, I mean,
that
yeah, I mean, I think you got to, for the way that, and, you know, and you're, you know, if you're going to be a game stickler, to your point, they both made the right game move.
yeah.
But, you know, the powerful, the extremely powerful,
Yeah, I don't think Omer will mind if
and,
Maryanne
I
and
think this is,
Drea
Drea
get
and
the
Maryanne
fishy tonight.
fishies. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Stephen, I saw that you were tweeting in the middle of Survivor about that people have got the wrong idea about spiders.
It's true.
I was gonna say, Stephen, you know Survivor's on right now, right?
Well, I mean, you know, a lot of people just assume that all spider bites, you know, people are, you know, and I've always been someone who's been scared of spiders, and I wanted to look into that fear. And the more I learn about spiders, you know, they're great. And there's very few medically significant spider bites. You know, the few spider bites that you do have to worry about from like brown recluses, you know, they're recluses, you know, they're not looking to bite you. You know, truly, they want to do their own thing. So I really have been liberated. And there was a great essay by Jeff Vandermeer, a writer I admire a lot, about how you know, basically pest control ads are, you know, creating this adversarial relationship we have with nature, where we're all just like every possible animal is something to be exterminated or eliminated rather than, you know, coexisting with. Yeah, it was a short essay, you know, it was a commercial break.
Okay. All right, you give people something to like. Wow, what if follow Stephen Fishbach is on Twitter? Follow at Stephen Fishbach. He'll give you something to read on the commercials. Yeah. Stephen, great job here tonight again. Thank you for.
Well, you too. Again, like, you know, I mean, like we both said at the start, you know, it's we're very, you know, we can only speak from our own perspective, and just acknowledging that, you know, we're not necessarily the right people to speak out. But I'm really glad that you're going to have people who have more of a position to talk and more perspective to talk about this stuff.
All right, Stephen. Thank you again. Thanks everybody for listening tonight. Of course, hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast this week. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.